They say great nations die in silence. Not with invasions. Not with revolutions. Not with the roar of armies or the cries of rebellion. But quietly, internally, long before anyone notices. So here is the question that has confused historians, economists, and leaders for centuries. If powerful nations are built with armies, wealth, innovation, and pride, why do they still collapse? Why do they fall even when they appear invincible? And more importantly, what is the weakness they all share, the one that hides beneath strength, waiting for the right moment to destroy everything? This is the story of that weakness. A weakness so universal that it has shaped the fate of empires, kingdoms, democracies, and modern states. A weakness that repeats through history, but is almost always seen too late. To understand it, we need to go back, way back. Because long before modern nations existed, this pattern was already at work, silently dismantling powerful civilizations one by one. It begins in ancient Mesopotamia, the land where the first cities rose from mud and ambition. Archaeologists look at their massive walls, their irrigation networks, their early writing, their temples. They see a civilization that looked strong, organized, advanced. But through their clay tablets and ruined foundations, we now know the truth. Their collapse began not with invasion, but with debt. A system they created to help farmers survive bad harvests slowly became a trap. Year after year, debts grew. Land transferred from small families to wealthy elites. The gap between rich and poor widened. Stress on the system cracked its foundation. And when drought finally struck, people revolted not because of nature, but because of pressure that had been building for generations. The hidden weakness was not the drought. It was the inequality that had made recovery impossible. This same weakness appears again in the great story of the Roman Republic. We often imagine Rome collapsing under barbarian invasions, but the truth is more subtle, and much darker. Rome didn't fall because outsiders were strong. Rome fell because insiders were divided. Land began concentrating in the hands of the wealthy through a system called the latifundia. Small farmers, the backbone of Roman power, lost their land, moved to cities, and became dependent on state welfare. The middle class, the stabilizing force of any nation, was hollowed out. Elites grew richer. The poor grew angrier. The Senate ignored warning after warning. And by the time Rome realized its weakness, the unity that once made it unstoppable had already evaporated. The barbarians simply walked into a system that had crumbled from within. Hidden weakness. Growing quietly. Ignored by those in power. And fatal when combined with crisis. But this story does not belong only to the ancient world. In the 16th century, the Spanish Empire controlled vast territories. Gold and silver poured in from the New World. They were the richest empire on earth, or so everyone believed. But beneath the gold was a different truth. Spain was wealthy not because it produced wealth, but because it imported it. The flood of silver caused massive inflation. The more money arrived, the less that money was worth. Prices soared. Wages stagnated. The empire grew addicted to foreign treasure, ignoring the decline of its own industries. Merchants and manufacturers in other countries grew stronger while Spain slowly weakened. The collapse took centuries, but the pattern was familiar. The weakness was hidden, ignored, and revealed only when too late. Now we jump forward to the 18th century. France, the center of culture, science, philosophy, and luxury. The most powerful nation in Europe. And yet within a few decades it fell into revolution, chaos, and bloodshed. What happened? The French monarchy looked powerful, but its finances were broken. Wars had drained the treasury. Debt ballooned. And instead of reforming the system, the court hid the numbers and hoped the problem would solve itself. But national weakness does not disappear. It accumulates. And when pressure becomes too great, collapse becomes inevitable. The French Revolution was not just about angry peasants. It was about a nation whose hidden financial weakness combined with social inequality and political arrogance until the whole system imploded. If this were just history, the story might end here. But the most unsettling part is this. The same pattern repeats in the modern world. Take the Soviet Union. From the outside, it looked like a superpower. Missiles, tanks, space achievements. But inside, a collapsing economy, inefficient production, food shortages hidden by propaganda, a system cracking under its own weight. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it shocked the world, yet internally, the signs had been visible for decades. Again, the hidden weakness was not military failure. It was the decay of institutions, the erosion of trust, and the inability to adapt. There is a chilling statistic that historians often cite. Over 90% of all large civilizations eventually collapse. Not because of enemies. Not because of disasters. But because of accumulated internal weaknesses, economic, political, social, or moral. These cracks are subtle. They grow slowly. And leaders often ignore them because the present seems calm and strong. But history is not kind to nations that fail to question themselves. So what, exactly, is this hidden weakness? What force is powerful enough to bring entire civilizations to their knees? It takes different forms in different eras. Debt, inequality, corruption, complacency, overexpansion, mistrust between leaders and citizens. Systems built on illusion rather than stability. But at its core, the weakness is always the same. A slow decay of resilience. Nations fall when they lose the ability to respond to crisis. When their institutions become rigid. Their people become divided. Their leaders become disconnected. And their systems become fragile. Strength is not the opposite of fragility. Strength without flexibility becomes fragility. That is the trap every major power eventually faces. Consider the United States, the largest economy in the world. The most technologically advanced. The most globally influential. Yet analysts point to growing debt levels, political polarization, declining trust in institutions, and widening economic gaps. None of these issues are fatal on their own. But history teaches that weakness rarely appears in one dramatic moment. It creeps, accumulates, becomes normal. The same concerns appear in countries across Europe, in rising powers like China, in developing nations with young populations but aging systems, and in wealthy nations facing problems they once believed impossible. If history repeats, and it always does, then every modern nation carries within it the seeds of its own downfall. Not because collapse is guaranteed, but because ignoring weakness is the first step toward it. Let's break down how this process works, because the pattern is clear in every major collapse. At first, a nation grows through innovation, unity, or necessity. People work together. Structures strengthen. Prosperity begins. Then success brings comfort. Comfort brings complacency. And complacency blinds a nation to the problems quietly building beneath the surface. The warning signs emerge slowly. Financial strain. Political division. Mistrust in institutions. Failure to adapt to new technology. Rising inequality. Environmental stress. External competition. Most nations survive one or two of these pressures. But when 3, 4, or 5 hit at the same time, systems break. The collapse appears sudden to those living through it. But by the time the first cracks are visible, the internal structure is already rotten. Just as termites can destroy a mansion long before the first beam falls, hidden weaknesses eat away at nations long before collapse becomes obvious. Modern historians sometimes use the term the invisible tipping point. This refers to the moment a nation's strength becomes an illusion. A moment that is only recognized long after collapse has begun. In Rome, it happened when citizenship lost meaning. In France, when people no longer trusted the monarchy. In Spain, when imported wealth replaced real production. In the Soviet Union, when truth and propaganda became indistinguishable. Today, nations ask themselves the same uncomfortable question. Has their invisible tipping point already passed, or is it still ahead? If we look deeper, one more pattern becomes clear. Nations do not collapse because they face challenges. Nations collapse because they face challenges they are no longer capable of solving. That is the true danger of hidden weakness. It robs a nation of flexibility, of unity, of the ability to correct its course. Look at the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Once innovative, it slowly became rigid. Reform attempts failed. Corruption grew. And by the time World War I arrived, the empire lacked the strength to survive. Look at the fall of the Qing dynasty in China. Internal corruption weakened the state. Foreign powers exploited the cracks. Rebellions spread. And the dynasty collapsed under the weight of problems it could no longer address. Look at the British Empire. It didn't vanish overnight. It was drained by wars, stretched too thin, and unable to maintain control as global movements for independence rose. Pattern after pattern. Not sudden collapse, but slow internal weakening revealed by external pressure. So what does all of this mean for us today? It means that every strong nation must constantly examine itself. Because the most dangerous threats are not the ones leaders warn about. They are the ones no one wants to look at. The debt that grows year after year. The divisions that become deeper. The trust that slowly erodes. The institutions that stop evolving. The values that become negotiable. The systems that rely on growth, even when growth slows. And perhaps the most dangerous weakness of all. The belief that it cannot happen to us. Every empire believed that. And every empire was wrong. Yet history also offers hope. Some nations, though rare, manage to detect their weaknesses early enough to change course. Japan, after World War II, rebuilt itself from ruin through dramatic reform. South Korea rose from poverty to become a technological powerhouse. Germany transformed after two catastrophic wars, rebuilding stable institutions. These stories show that collapse is not destiny. Weakness is not fate. And decline can be reversed, but only if a nation is willing to confront the truths it fears the most. And now, as we close, consider these three lessons that history repeats again and again. First, strength is not the absence of weakness. Strength is the ability to repair it. Great nations survive not by avoiding problems, but by adapting to them. The moment a society stops reforming, it begins decaying. Second, division is more dangerous than any external enemy. No empire fell united. When people stop trusting each other, collapse becomes a matter of time. And third, the greatest weakness is believing there are none. Every powerful nation that ever fell believed its stability was permanent. And every one of them discovered too late that nothing, no matter how large, wealthy, or advanced, is immune to the laws of history. If nations forget this truth, history will remind them. If they ignore it, history will repeat itself. And if they deny it, history will bury them. If you found this story thought-provoking, share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is the greatest hidden weakness of modern nations today? And if you want more stories that reveal the patterns shaping our world, consider subscribing, because history may not repeat exactly, but it always rhymes.